The bank's Lloyd Blankfein was in the line of fire in a 3-hour grilling by US lawmakers on Capitol Hill. The CEO of Goldman Sachs faced a cross-examination from a panel of senators. They accused the bank of profiting from the financial crisis and the downturn in the housing market at the expense of its clients.
You are taking a position against the very security that you are selling, and you are not troubled.
Senator,
And you want people to trust you.
Senator, I think people...
Why would people...
us.
I won't trust you. If you came to me and wanted to sell me securities and you didn't tell me that you have a bet against that same security,
Senator,
you don't think that affects my thinking?
The hearing also set the stage for the first public appearance of Fabrice Tour, the banker accused of defrauding investors. The 31-year-old mortgage specialist categorically denied charges of fraud by the SEC, but admitted that his statements on the design of the securities could have been different.
I think what I was expressing in that email was that with respect to ratings-based clients, they had a tendency to argue less about bid-offer spread than hedge fund clients. And the second part of the answer that I wanted to make clear is all the clients we did business with on the CDO desk, including ACA and IKB, which we probably will talk about separately, were highly sophisticated institutions, which were also falling in the sort of ratings-based sort of buyer category.
Well, Tour's boss, Lloyd Blankfein, spoke to CNBC's David Faber after the hearing. Faber began by asking Blankfein about the transaction at the centre of the SEC charge and asked whether senators were right in likening Goldman's role in the deal to that of a bookie.
Well, I don't think that's right. Synthetic CDOs allowed buyers and sellers to be able to take the kinds of positions they want in the housing market. It wasn't a casino. And also, these were very, very highly sophisticated parties. In fact, among the most sophisticated in the world in a professional market.
But someone asked the question, why do we even need a synthetic CDO market? We're talking about a derivative of a derivative of a derivative. We have a $12 trillion physical mortgage market that already exists during this period of time. Why synthetic CDOs?
I think that what synthetic CDOs allowed people to do was to efficiently and quickly get the kind of diversification and risk they wanted on the buy side or on the sell side. And there were hedgers and market participants that did this. I think issues were raised. And I think that in connection with regulatory reform, I think people will be looking at the derivatives markets and to see that notwithstanding the value they contribute to the market, are some securities too complex and hard to manage.
And what do you think at this point when you look back on the synthetic CDO market? Do you think perhaps it's something that, you know what, I wish we had never touched it, I wish we hadn't done it?
I understand fully the reason that drove the transactions, and I think it could be,
Well, what was the reason that drove the transactions?
Well, with respect to people wanted positive or negative risk to the housing market.
Right. And people were searching for yield. But I wonder, couldn't they have found it in some other area? If you had demand on the I want more yield side, couldn't you have satisfied that in a way? Or even if people were out there buying CDS and RMBS, it didn't necessarily mean that you had to end up having it in a synthetic CDO, did it?
Well, these were professional investors who sought the risk and obtained the risk that they wanted in the market.
Joining us around the desk to discuss now is Chris Roebuck, visiting professor of transformational leadership at the Cass Business School. When all's said and done, I mean, there was some great rhetoric from both sides yesterday, great defence from Messrs. Blankfein and Tour, and very attacking comments from the senators. But did anyone come out better on the back of this, despite the rhetoric?
The interesting thing is that actually there's different audiences watching what happened yesterday. First of all, you've got other bankers who are probably saying, well, that sounded perfectly reasonable, that's what we were doing, that's the way the market works. There might be some people within the banking industry who weren't involved in that part of banking who are saying, good God, was that what they were up to? Then you have the politicians who are saying, OK, well, this is very, very complicated stuff. I think I smell a rat, so let's go digging here. And actually, if we look at it, there appears to be a conflict of interest. You then have the customers, the Goldman clients, who are saying, well, they say we come first, but maybe we don't necessarily come first, and let's look at that in slightly more detail. How do you define that? And then finally, you've got the court of public opinion, who are probably looking at what they saw as a bunch of people who didn't answer questions, who were trying to excuse what, from an individual member of the public's perspective, is something that's unethical. You sell someone something, and then you bet against it going wrong.
Taking all those interest groups into consideration, what's the next stage? I mean, is the SEC going to mount a successful litigation against Goldman Sachs? And the second point, which is more important perhaps for the broader industry going forward, is this going to mean there's going to be more meaningful legislation on, well, not only transparency, but also the breaking up of the banks and their activities potentially?
Well, obviously, we don't know what's going to happen with the SEC case, because we don't know what all the evidence is, and we don't know what's going to come out. But I suspect that's going to go through it to its logical conclusion. Certainly in terms of regulation, I suspect that the politicians in the US now certainly have the bone between their teeth, and they are going to run with it. And that, particularly if they start getting lobbying attempts by the banks again to start blocking them, it's going to be a game of upping the ante all the time.
But before you come in, you mentioned the politicians have got the bone between their teeth. The fact remains the Republicans and Democrats are at each other's throats now as well because of the rancour created, dare I say it, over healthcare and issues such as that. Will they be able to act together in that poisonous environment in Washington to create meaningful legislation?
If you think about the position that the Republicans are in, they can't not act. Do the Republicans really want to go into the November elections being perceived as being on the side of rich bankers who caused the economy to crash? Answer, no, it's suicide. So what they have to do is, they're probably objecting because they want to get something out of it. But in the end, the Republicans are going to have to go with this.
Got to come in.
Yeah, I was just... I was going to agree with you and say that the fact is it's rare to see bipartisan agreement in the Senate. I think that's one of the most shocking things for the markets, to see them actually agreeing with each other. Is that, I'm not a lawyer, and none of us are here, so we have to be a little bit careful in terms of how we interpret what's actually going to go on here. But do you think this actually might lead to Glass-Steagall again? Do we go back as far as saying, we could solve most of these problems, instead of piecemeal trying to mend this and mend that, maybe we should just go back and say, well, actually, if we brought Glass-Steagall back and admitted we shouldn't have got rid of it, wouldn't that solve most of the problems? Do you think that they were in a position that they would be bold enough to admit
Maybe that's going too far. What's going to happen is, obviously, on the banking end of the interest groups, everyone's going to be saying as little control as possible, because that means we can make more money. On the other extreme, the people that really suffered as a result of this are going to be saying maximum regulation. Now, Glass-Steagall was quoted by the chairman of the committee, even the words from that committee in the 30s saying this is what we need to do. And we know that the split between the investment bank and the retail banks didn't come down until 1999. So there will be some people pushing for that. But whether that is viable in a 2010 global financial market now, when it was viable then, is probably a big question. I mean, the interesting thing I find, though, is that all sorts of other stuff came out there. Washington Mutual, 90% of their mortgages were verbal statements of income. What did they expect was going to happen? If you want to have a house, you would need to state that your income was $100,000. How much is your income?
Yeah.
It's a hiding to nothing.
Chris, the nub of this debate, anyway, as it's taken place, was effectively that they sold something while they were taking an active position against it. So the politicians have tried to portray them as some kind of dodgy used car salesman, in effect. But I think a number of our emailers make an interesting point about, do the politicians actually understand how the system works? Because clearly the bank would not want to reveal its own positions to the opposition, even whilst another part of the bank is creating product for them.
That's the critical problem that the banks have, in that is normal practice. It makes sense. It makes the market work, and that's the way you do things. The problem is that unless that's explained to the public in a way that is simple and concise, to the public it looks dodgy. From the perspective of the politicians, some of them are beginning to understand it, and they can, as we saw from some of the members of the committee, they understand why it has to be done. The problem is that some of them don't, and you could see from the exchanges there that there was a little bit of confusion as to what was going on, and people thumbing through big books, and whilst that was a genuine problem with the Goldmans representatives, it just made them look as if they were obfuscating and trying to delay an answer.
Chris, pleasure having you in. Thank you for coming and talking with us, and I'm sure we'll see you again on this story, as it's going to run and run for a bit longer here. Let's move on and let's pick up